Hello and welcome to Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our broadcast and others of you are joining us on our digital platforms. Either way, we are glad you're with us. I'm Paris Alston, co-host of Morning Edition on GBH 89.7. Tonight, young, gifted, and black. What's on the minds of millennials and Gen Zs of color? We brought together some young adults to get their opinion and thoughts on a range of issues from education to the presidential election to mental health. So let's get started. Joining me tonight is Joel Crawford, a sophomore at Harvard University studying government and philosophy. Also with us is Adalia De Silva, the Youth Leadership Committee co-chair at Bagley, the Boston Alliance of Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Youth, a youth-led, adult-supported social support organization advocating for programs, policies, and services for the LGBTQ plus youth community. And last but not least is Erin Ashley Bailey, who is the Affirmative Action Officer of the Boston Ward 10 Democratic Committee. She's also a Spark Boston Council alumnus. Welcome to each of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
I'm like already hearing the Aretha Franklin song, Young, Gifted, and Black, and here we are. So I'm going to ask all of you this question, but I'm going to start with you, Erin. How would you categorize or describe Gen Z and millennials today?
I'd say Gen Z and millennials are pretty social media savvy. They're really highly engaged and they're hungry for information.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Adalia?
I would use the word bold. I feel like whenever I see my peers, they're always the people who are like wearing the bright colored outfits and who are very outspoken.
Mm-hmm. And Joel?
I think for myself, I would say empathetic. I think our community, Gen Z in particular, more than other generations, recognizes the joint struggle amongst everybody and knowing that there is no justice until there's justice for everybody.
And they're very vocal about that, right? You mess up with Gen Z, it's over, right? They're coming for you. The internet has become a thing. A friend of mine shared a statistic with me today about how there was a Glassdoor census data or poll that's projected Zoomers would be replacing, Zoomers also the other name for Gen Z, would be replacing Boomers in the workforce by 2024. It's obviously now 2024, and this data was from last year. And when they come into these spaces, whether it's the workplace or anywhere else, what are they bringing with them? I'll start with you, Adalia.
This is a great question. I was just thinking about this. I feel like what I see amongst my peers is a lot of boundary setting in a way that hasn't been traditionally in workspaces. So Gen Z will be very like, oh, we end at 5, my laptop is closed and I'm doing my next thing at 5, which I really appreciate because it creates like a sustainable way of working than the always like on a grind, always having something to do sometimes.
And how is that a shift from how things were before, Erin?
I think before people expected you to be on all the time at the drop of a hat and that work was everything and that there were, fewer lines between personal and professional. And I think that people are really hungry now to have that line of demarcation and that separation.
Mm-hmm. And how does that shift things for everyone else, Joel? I mean, you mentioned how Gen Zers are really thinking about in a global way. How does that make things better, or maybe how does it make things more challenging for those around?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's an understanding that there's a lot more to life than just work, that people are dealing with real issues. Real issues are impacting people every day. And so bringing that mindset into the workplace is making our companies, our organizations a lot more involved because the people that are working there are involved.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to stay with you because I'm curious about what you think has inspired that shift. I mean, what's really made not only us want to be a little more present in our own lives and understand that there's more to life than work and achievement and that sort of thing, but be able to do that in a way where we're also still being vocal about the things we care about.
Absolutely. I think social media has played the biggest role in that. You're able to connect with people across the country, recognizing people can use their voice on social media platforms, namely TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, being able to use their voice and share with other people, and then being able to see other people that also are sharing in your experience as well. It forms a sort of community that makes you feel like you're able to share how you feel.
Mm-hmm. And Adalia, I mean, we were talking a little bit about how obviously the U.S. government right now is weighing a ban on TikTok, or at least wanting to require the company that owns it, ByteDance, to sell it. And TikTok is like the app for Gen Z and millennials right now. How do you see it? What role does it play in the lives of the folks you work with?
I think that in Bagley and across spaces speaking to peers, TikTok has become a way of learning through a more accessible means. Although it's not the end-all be-all, it's a really great gateway into understanding more of the issues that are going on around us.
Mm-hmm. And so much of it is about influence, right? I mean, we are the age of the influencer. It's like, there's some, I can't remember where, I think it's a school in California, but there's a class about how to be an influencer, right? Which is just, is wild. But Aaron, you were telling me backstage about a statistic about how, just looking at the presidential election, for instance, young white voters, many of them are leaning towards Trump because of the influence that he has on social media. And I want to dig deeper into that. But first, what does influence mean for this generation?
I think influence is everything. It's the opportunity to say what you have to say, how you want to say it, and to have other people follow you and like you. It's really this other persona that you have, and that you can leverage that either to monetize it, to make money, or to bring people around to your ideas.
And how is former president and now presidential hopeful, again, Donald Trump, doing that? He's actually,
some would argue, doing it in a very sagacious way. He's very smart about it. He knows how to launch an impressive social media campaign. He can stay at the top of the Twitter feed or the X feed. You will see him if you're scrolling, and some people say, younger people are saying that because he has a great social media campaign, he may win over Biden, at least with the younger voters.
Joel, how is that resonating with different young voter demographics, given that there was a Harvard Youth poll from 2023 about how voting intention was declining most rapidly, or most pronounced. The decline was most pronounced, rather, among young Black American voters.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people feel that they may be even more comfortable not voting than picking a side. Because of that, it's a little frightening, because people should have the opportunity to use their voice. One thing that we're doing on our campus is finding ways to increase voter registration by ensuring that every student, predominantly in minority and marginalized communities, are voting and are using the opportunity to use their vote.
Adalia, do you feel like the candidates that we have now, look at you already making a face.
Sorry.
I haven't asked the question yet. Are they in touch with what this young generation of voters wants?
I guess as a person who looks nothing like either candidates and has lived a very different life than them, it feels very disillusioned, or jading. It's jading me as a voter. I want to be politically involved, but then it feels like picking the lesser of two evils. And feels frustrating when my peers and I are politically involved and are reaching out and trying to make things happen. It is not always guaranteed that they're going to hear us out on the issues that actually matter to us.
And what does that political involvement look like?
Calling reps, sending postcards, different things like that, showing up to their place of work offices, trying to talk to them, but sometimes they won't actually be there, or doors are shut, and yeah, it gets difficult when that's what you're met with when you're trying to talk to people who are supposed to represent you.
And Aaron, can you give us some insight on that? I mean, given that you have been so close to the political world, I mean, what's the disconnect? What's happening there?
I think the disconnect is that people don't know how to get politically involved on the hyper-local level, and there's a lot of fanfare and information on social media about issues, but there really isn't the ABC, this is the formula of how to get involved and be on Boston Ward 10, how to become a delegate, and how to even write an email to your councilor, your city councilor, or to your state rep. So I think it's like that disconnect of information, and then feeling comfortable when you show up there, because they're truly not diverse spaces.
Do you get the sense that some people who are not Gen Zers or Millennials think that this demographic doesn't care about the most pressing issues today?
I would say that I would say both yes and no, and not to answer out of both sides of my mouth. I think some people would use their sort of measure of what interest and engagement looks like and say, no, they're not interested. They would be at the meeting. But then you see them and they're, protesting in the streets, and they're protesting at universities. So obviously they really care. But I think that there's a lack of information about how does the system actually work to really get them to mobilize and to be more engaged and to effectuate change.
What do you think about that, Joel?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think on top of that, especially in colleges, a lot of students aren't at home. So when it comes down to voting issues, it's a lot harder to get your voice heard when you're so far away, especially I think in 2020, I think we'll see this year as an increase in mail-in ballots, especially for presidential elections. But on the local level, it's very hard to get involved when you're not currently at home.
Mm-hmm. And Adalia, I mean, when we think about Gen Zers and millennials and getting them involved, right? I mean, do you get the sense that people take this age group seriously?
That's an interesting question. I think in some extents, yes. I think back to 2020 when Donald Trump was having one of his rallies and a bunch of people on TikTok organized together and bought tickets for his rally, and then it was just a bunch of empty seats. So like in that way, I think that they take us seriously because we can mobilize so efficiently sometimes.
Wasn't like BTS involved
Yes,
with this?
yes, I can talk about that too.
Okay,
yes.
Tell us more.
So it was, I believe, the K-pop like stands, which is like people who follow a lot of different like K-pop groups, organized together and said, we're going to reserve seatings for this rally, and then didn't show up. And it was like basically very empty and very disappointing for Donald Trump. I think in that way, and I think that's why they're so pressed on the TikTok issue, is because they see how much of a mobilizer it's been. And then can you re-ask the second part of your question?
Just in terms of like, are they being listened to? Is that catching the attention? I mean, that happened, right? But we still have this idea of a ban on the table, yet people are talking about not only how effective TikTok is for mobilizing, but people are making money on TikTok. Like, these are some people's livelihoods.
Yeah. I think it's similar to what Aaron was saying, too, of like understanding how we can better organize in a more structured way sometimes, too, and get things actually like out in our local offices, state offices, and hopefully on a national platform as well.
So it wasn't that long ago that the term hashtag activism was going around, right? When we think about this age of social media and how anybody can write anything on any platform, put a hashtag on it, and suddenly it's activism. But it must be deeper than that, right, Aaron?
Absolutely deeper than that. And as you were talking to Dahlia, I was thinking in my mind, you know, I don't think that politicians care as much if you're not voting and if you're not contributing to their political campaign, if I can just be candid from my experience. You know, I think that there's activism on social media and you want to use that influence, but showing up at the meetings, having your voice heard, filling out the surveys, lobbying and saying this is what matters to me and I'm going to vote and here's my voting record, that's when you'll get your voice heard, and that's the true activism that will change. And
I imagine that, I mean, right, when you look at things that have happened in recent years in terms of policy, right, you look at what the Supreme Court has done on affirmative action, on reproductive rights, on student loan debt, name any other issue, right? When you look at climate change, there's a lot to be apathetic about for future generations. Joel, I mean, when you talk about outreach, right, how do you meet people where they are in that apathy?
Absolutely. I think listening is very important. One thing that we do on our campus is hold spaces where people can come and actually share how they feel about certain issues, and then trying to provide them the resources to go out and actually act on those. So being a resource and a place for people to come and talk about how they're feeling is very important.
And what are you hearing when you have those conversations?
Absolutely. I think number one of the main issues we're looking for in this upcoming election that people were not necessarily completely aware of in the last one is just the important impacts of the Supreme Court, understanding that, one, the court has a lot of power. So this upcoming election, making sure we're selecting someone that we feel comfortable and has the authority enough to place someone in that position if there is a vacancy in the next 4 years. There's a lot of just upset and frustration, especially surrounding the recent overturning of decisions such as Roe v. Wade, affirmative action. So just looking to make sure that we're comfortable and ready that if a vacancy does appear, we put the right person in that place.
And these issues aren't just political, right? They're personal. And we're dealing with so many issues that are increased. Everything is personal, right? And all politics are personal. I think about the fact that in the Massachusetts primary this past March, 9.4% of Massachusetts voters selected no preference or no confidence on their ballots in a protest vote against the war in Gaza, to try to send a message to both to all candidates, but primarily to the Democratic Party, just saying, listen, something different needs to happen, right? Are these things effective? Do you think so, Adalia?
I think it definitely sends a message that people are willing to, like once again, what Aaron was saying, like find their own ways to disrupt the system in the natural way that things are going, that they're going to continue to look for strategies that will catch attentions of elected officials.
And do you think some of it comes to, I mean, obviously, again, it's personal, and it comes down to how people are feeling, right? And we're kind of moving, you know, towards all this technological innovation. We've got AI on the surface. ChatGPT is writing something crazy every time you turn around. But there's also research more and more that shows how important human skills are going to be, not only in our workforce, but presumably in our government, in our politics, in our education systems. Is this something that Gen Z and millennials are particularly primed to handle well?
I think so. I guess I've always heard that, like, we're the generation we're born with phones in our hands, and I think that there's just a lot of skills that people gain in really, like, interesting ways, like the K-pop people being really involved and having, like, a network of people where if you guys talk to one another, you can mobilize, like, all these people just because you guys listen to the same kind of music, which I don't know has always been accessible to other generations. There's also, like, people who make, like, edits and things like that online, and now they just have like a whole resume of skills of like how they use Adobe Flash because they make edits, and it's really interesting the way that it like has built up people's like skills and ways to like connect with one another.
Aaron, how is that manifesting just in terms of what we could see in the future? I mean, whether it's new jobs or just new systems and structures.
Actually, if I can add on a little bit to what Dahlia was saying, I think I actually disagree a little bit. I think after the pandemic, after everyone has been inside and everyone has been on Zoom and texting on their phones, I don't know that people have the same social skills that they had in the past and that are really going to be required for the next workforce and the next government. I know you talked a little bit about the loneliness pandemic, but I think it's really important. A great way to mobilize and to have influence is actually off of social media and having in-person meetings with people, having people over for the weekend or chatting in your local neighborhood and talking about politics. I found that that's a great way to educate people. But can you re-ask your question, your first one?
Well, I want to pick up on this, actually. Thank you. Because you talked about loneliness and just like, I mean, so much of this is related to mental health, right? Which I feel like we're hearing so much more about. So what I originally asked was how we could start to see things shift maybe like 10, 20 years from now because of what Gen Zers and millennials are doing. But I think some of this builds on what you're saying, right? Because we're honoring feelings more, right? Which sounds like such a mushy-gushy thing, but it's all coming from the shared experience that we had, but that Gen Zers and millennials, I think, have sort of been so like particularly positioned to navigate in a special way.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the more that we teach people how to talk to each other, how to hear the other side of the story, how to express an opinion without shutting others down, and how to really build community on the local level, I think that we'll continue to build those skills up. It's funny because as things are changing and as much as technology advances, you'll never be able to replace the human touch. You'll never be able to replace in person, and you'll never be able to replace that connection and looking somebody in the face. And I think that that's what people are craving for. And if you really wanted influence and to change the world, you'd leverage that.
You know, I often think about like, back in the day, right, you had these real pillars of activism. We think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X or Stokely Carmichael, Fannie Lou Hamer, like, right, the list goes on. Do we have those kinds of figures today, Joel?
Absolutely. I think now more than ever, because of platforms like social media, I would agree that I think that we oftentimes can maybe spend too much time on social media, but I think it's very important that we have it because it allows people to actually share their voice. You can be living in California and hear somebody on the other side of the country experiencing the exact same problem as you and mobilize that much faster. And there are a lot of students that are taking initiatives right now today to start their own platforms, and because of this sense of empathy that we have in our generation, we're able to listen, care, and find ways to commune with them.
So I want to talk a little bit. I know we dug into the world of K-pop a bit, but I want to do more about the pop culture because so much of it sets the tone, right, for not just Gen Zers and millennials, but it's happened all throughout time that we see what's happening in pop culture influences society and vice versa. What are some things? Say that you're not a Gen Zer, you're not a millennial, right? You're not on TikTok, but you're like, well, I want to peek inside the world. What are some of the big things that are of interest?
Oh, this is a good question. I don't know. We were talking about Beyonce. And
we sure were.
Great segue. I think that I watched a really good video about her new album and how it like encompasses the like Black Southern experience, and that was really it was a great take, and I really liked that video. So I feel like understanding and seeing where she is, especially as a Black woman in pop culture, and how prevalent she is, how much influence she holds, says a lot about generally pop culture and what's going on in pop culture.
And especially the staying power, right? I mean, she's spanning across generations here. Yeah. Erin, what about you? Can you give us a peek into your window of pop culture?
You know, I think I have to actually think on that. I've been doing a lot of reading of the news lately. I haven't been as much into the pop culture because it's keeping me up at night a little bit. But
and there's a lot of other things to be paying attention to right now. But even in the news, right? I think we see some of these elements. Like we see people sort of taking on different, right? Like they like TikTok is there's news on TikTok. People get it from there. Not saying that's always the best news source, right? But there's a little bit of crossover, or you begin to see things that happen. I'm thinking about the woman who did like 50 chapters on TikTok about her spouse or something, or her former partner, and that ended up on CNN. And I was like, what is happening? But Joel, I mean, what do you make of this crossover essentially, and especially as you know, you're on campus and you got your ear to the ground. It's almost like a game of telephone, but sort of how do things move through the zeitgeist, so to speak?
Absolutely. I think it's a great initiative. I think, especially from a political standpoint, it allows the politicians to seem a lot more down to earth and relatable. Recently, we've seen President Biden inviting rappers to come and speak with him and go on to events with him, different people that we look up to or that we might connect with more. So it kind of allows them to be more humanized and see that they actually are caring for our interests. We even see elected officials following our TikTok trends and making videos that resemble videos that we might make on our own. So I think it's a very good thing to connect with young voters, and I think that my peers are enjoying it a lot.
Okay. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but climate change is obviously one of many pressing issues for this age group. Earth Day is coming up this Monday, April 22nd. And I think the question is always in the midst of, you know, the age of climate anxiety, eco-anxiety. This is somewhat a relatively new term that has been brought forward by this generation because it's so front and center. We're already seeing the effects. But do you find hope? And Erin, I'll start with you just in terms of what Gen Zers and Millennials are doing to bring more awareness to this issue.
Absolutely. I know we were talking about this backstage, but the movie Don't Look Up, it's something that sort of it has that little bit of humor in it that's like other people are aware of this problem and we're not sort of just spinning our wheels. But I think that people having more conversations about the importance of being outside, being active, leveraging your green spaces, making sure that you're outside, planting trees, attending things like Earth Day. So even though there's a crisis, I think there's also a rush to action and a rush to activism and bringing up how important being outdoors is for mental health.
Dahlia, what about you?
I would say that sometimes I like to take things one step at a time, and climate change and the world feeling like it's on fire can be a lot. So I try to think of what are small things that I can do throughout my day that I can make the world a little bit more greener. One of the ways is the way that I organize my closet and my clothes, so I haven't bought in clothes a lot in the past year or two. Trying to wear everything that I have in my closet, so I made a little...
Do you thrift?
Yes, I do. So I made a little challenge for myself last semester that I wouldn't repeat an outfit, and so I spent the whole however many months wearing trying to wear different iterations of my clothes. So trying to take it chunk by chunk and seeing how I can be reducing my carbon footprint is really important to me.
And Joel, what about you?
So I'm from Texas. And in Texas, we are experiencing a lot of the climate crisis, extreme heat conditions, a lot of flooding, very cold conditions as well. I think because these issues are affecting us directly, a lot of people are actually more engaged and it's more of a sense of urgency to actually get them solved. Most recently, we have seen elected officials make decisions that kind of negate the climate crisis. Most notably in Texas, last year our governor signed a bill that limited the water breaks that construction workers could take. Bills like that, when we're in the middle of a climate crisis, are activating people to go and protest. What that looks like is going to the governor's house, going to Capitol Hill, going to these places and actually advocating on behalf of these people that are experiencing these directly.
So we have about a minute left here, and I'm just going to wrap by asking each of you, how do you hope Gen Zers and millennials will be remembered, you know, in 50 years when someone else is having a panel talking about whatever the current thing is, and then how do you hope they remember us?
I hope they remember that we just did something with all of the information that we had.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that they remember us as like a bold generation of people who are trying to make changes and stay connected despite barriers to be isolated.
Mm-hmm.
I hope they remember us as a generation that made the change when they wanted to see the change, that they inserted themselves in places where maybe they weren't traditionally at, and advocated on behalf of themselves.
Mm-hmm. I love all of that. And I'm going to add to it, because you all said such profound things. I'm going to say we did all those things and we look good doing them.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. Stick around. That is the end of our broadcast and the end of our show. And I want to say thank you to each of our guests and thank you to everyone watching. But we are going to continue this conversation on our digital platforms. Keep having a little bit of fun with this on YouTube and Facebook. So stay tuned. I'm Paris Alston, co-host of Morning Edition on GBH 89.7. We are on YouTube and Facebook with our post-show continuing our discussion on millennials and Gen Zs of color, telling us what's on their minds. So before we left off, we were talking about how we hope that our generation is going to be remembered from years to come. Things like being bold, things like actually doing what we said we were going to do, and doing so with keeping everyone in mind and the collective, and looking good doing it. So there is a lot to do, though. I mean, one thing that we didn't get to discuss pre-show was that education, right, is such a big topic right now. I think not only because of what's happened with the Supreme Court with the affirmative action and the student loan debt rulings, but also I think there's kind of a question about, like, do I need to go to college? Especially when you look at sort of the economic landscape and all the different things that Gen Zers and millennials are able to do. Joel, how do you see people weighing and wrestling with that decision?
Absolutely. I think there has been an increase, especially on the corporate side of companies, to look at people who maybe did not go the traditional route to college and universities if they cannot. But I do think that there is an actual consideration, considering how expensive college can be, how many student loans you'll have to incur going to such institutions. So you have to kind of balance between what you think might be best for your future life, but also what might be best for you in the current moment.
And even if you do decide, say you decide to go as a young black student, right? Like, we've got this affirmative action ruling. A lot of people are, I mean, this has always been a question, right? Do I go to an HBCU? Do I go to a PWI? Has that conversation changed or more people leaning toward HBCUs given the affirmative action ruling?
Absolutely. So there has been a big increase in applications at historically black colleges and universities. I think at elite institutions such as Harvard, PWIs, there is a question of, do I belong? Should I be here? And what does my presence at an all-white space like this mean? So there's been a lot of conversations about what can we do on our end as students at Harvard, as students at these elite institutions, as black students at these institutions, to make sure everyone does feel comfortable. One thing that we've done is we have actually launched different initiatives on campus to increase and give support to students that are applying to Harvard and universities, helping them with applications, with admissions, and just trying to be a mentor and give them good advice.
And Aaron, I mean, how does that resonate with you? I know that you went to UPenn, you're UPenn alum. Wharton, and I mean, did any of those conversations come up for you as you were thinking about your college choices?
No, Wharton was a decision that I made, and I was like, you know what? I decided to go to Wharton, so I'll just go to Wharton. But it was actually a challenging experience being in a PWI. I always say that the best part of my Wharton experience was the international travel and the people that I met, and then my experience as an alumni. So I would say it was absolutely an investment for a lifetime. But it was difficult in the program, and I would say that the question that you really need to ask yourself is, do I feel comfortable in this space right now, and what will I not learn, and what's the opportunity cost of not learning how the other side thinks and how the other side works? I mean, and you can only typically learn that in those spaces, especially if you come from a background like mine, where I was the first one to go to college and to go on to an MBA program.
Adalia, I mean, that makes me think about, I mean, exactly what you're saying, exactly what Aaron is saying, just about like knowing to navigate this world that we're in, that isn't just one race or one demographic, right? And increasingly we know that the U.S. population, for instance, is going to get more and more diverse, more racially mixed. Are we prepared for that reality? Are Gen Zers and Millennials really embracing that reality, or are we seeing maybe some residual effects even of the racial issues that we've had that we haven't confronted?
I think what Joel was saying before really resonated, that we're a generation of empathy, and though maybe we don't have all the bridges completely mended, we're working towards that and trying to meet each other in the middle as much as we can. But of course there's still struggles, and the country continues to like push youth to be more and more polarized, which is really unfortunate, but I hope that we can work together to try and get somewhere in the middle.
We, the word world peace came up as we were kind of chit-chatting. What does that mean to each of you?
I can start. I guess for me, I think of the world and like us as a larger community as a living organism. I think that's like a sociological concept. So understanding how we can live and have this like harmony amongst each other in a sustainable way that's good for everybody.
Joel, what about you?
World peace to me means recognizing our differences, recognizing the ways that we aren't all the same, and also embracing that and not letting the differences distract us and pull us apart, but actually bring us together.
For me, world peace is just because you're not my twin doesn't mean you're not my brother, right? And even though we don't all look alike, it doesn't mean that you're not a human being with basic, fundamental, inalienable rights.
And this is also bringing up for me this idea of, I mean, we were talking about wealth creation too, right? And wealth in the sense of like, it's social wealth, it's social equity in a way of just us having more things, that shared commonalities and common goals, so that we can say what's mine is yours, in the sense of there's no scarcity, right? There's enough for all of us to get in on that. How are Gen Zers and Millennials helping shift the conversation in that way, Erin?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think it's sharing knowledge and information about how to get that done. How do you buy your first home? How do you prepare to buy your second home? What does that look like? What are some of the hidden costs in that? How do you build community in a way that as you transition as a first-time home buyer and a first-time landlord, what does that look like? So I think even just having the conversations about wealth creation and understanding it's not about immediate consumption right now, but that we're delaying gratification, and these are the tactical ways in order to do that. I think that's how our generation is handling it.
Adalia, do you think this generation wants to buy homes? Can they buy homes?
I don't know. I know a couple of my peers who have talked about wanting to buy homes. Me personally, I'm like in between. Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna be able to. I continue to see like just everything is more expensive in general. Like back to, I guess, like the social media thing of like when everyone was freaking out because eggs were so expensive. So I don't know, but maybe home ownership isn't for our generation. Maybe it's a different way of living than what has been done before.
So are you all familiar with the trading platform, crypto mostly, Coinbase? I was like joking earlier that I was trying to be a crypto bro. So this is not me trying to go in that direction, but there's a commercial that they had aired. It was on ESPN, and I just remember, and they were talking about how each generation before us had gone through these steps of like, go to college, graduate, get married, buy a house, have the kid, whatever. And then when it got to us, it was like, oh, go live with 4 roommates, right? And then like, maybe I'll get to retire, maybe not. And of course that stokes all this uncertainty and this like, you know, what am I doing with my life? These existential crises. But Joel, from your perspective, how does that sort of shift the mindset of what people feel like they need to learn to be equipped to be in the world. Maybe it's not necessarily about home ownership and all those kinds of things, but it's becoming educated about other things.
Absolutely. I think back to the social media thing, you're able to see how other people are doing it now. It's no longer a secret. Using platforms like Coinbase and trading overall, it's not secret anymore. People can go on social media and see other people trading, and people are sharing how to trade. So you see a lot more of the younger generation doing that. But I also think our generation is very good at living in the moment. Maybe there are things that we should be concerned about, but we feel confident that we'll find a way to do it. And by kind of working together and learning together, whether that be we all get an apartment together and split it, we'll all get through it together.
Well, how do you think we'll shake up some systems? I mean, you know, like our systems are kind of falling apart. Frankly, I'm just going to say it. But Erin, what power do you think Gen Zers and Millennials have to disrupt them?
The power of our vote and the power of where, you know, even though times are tough, I mean, you can always donate to certain campaigns, but showing up, being present, making yourself known as a community leader that can say, hey, I have a group that I meet up with every month. I have an email list that's this deep, or however many followers on my social media, and I can tell them to vote and, you know, give them information, and this is what we'll do. We'll show up at the polls. I think that that's the way. As much as things are changing, things are staying pretty much the same in terms of how you actually effectuate change, and I think that we can continue to use our influence in our networks and share information that way.
Dahlia, what are your thoughts on that?
I kind of disagree in a certain way. I think that we're going to start to make or try and make changes outside of the systems. For myself, sometimes reform through government doesn't always resonate. So I feel like we're going to continue to find paths and ways, like Bagley has a lot of services that it offers to support the community. So maybe things more community-based, more mutually aid-based that will support one another.
Could you give us an example of one of those?
So they have a direct aid program. So if you're struggling with getting your groceries, for instance, you can fill out a form, and then they'll have an interview with you, and then they could give you a gift card to Stop and Shop, and then you could go get groceries. So different initiatives like that, I think, will help us through certain times of uncertainty and the systems kind of falling apart around us.
Joel, do you see, are people becoming disenchanted, or are they becoming, I mean, I'm sure there's a degree of mobilization, right? But at what point does it, just trying to get into and infiltrate the system and disrupt it, just become too exhausting?
Absolutely. I think I would agree actually with both of them. I think that there is an initiative and there is a desire to go into these places and take up space and let your presence be known. But oftentimes, as was mentioned, those spaces weren't created for a lot of us. Because of that, we have to find workarounds. I think at our institution, there are a lot of student organizations that are working outside of traditional means to say that maybe there are some goals that maybe we can't necessarily achieve in that regard, but there are other ways to still achieving the same, getting progress in the way that we want to. But I do think that one of the most important things that we understand is that progress is more important than anything, and that a little progress is better than no progress. So as long as we're taking steps to get further than we were before, we're doing a very good job.
Do you think that that sort of warrants a change in the way that we're educating future generations?
Absolutely. Traditionally, I think we understand that there may be some things that we don't need to know.
Ooh, like what? Tell us, say more.
I think my teachers might be a little disappointed in me. But I think we
like calculus.
Sure.
I mean, it's interesting, but like, teach me how to do a budget, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that, but also integrating more of the community into our classrooms. We no longer want to just learn the math. We want to learn how we can apply the math to real life things. And I think I'm seeing a shift in the curriculum itself. We want to learn how, we want to read this book. We also want to try and see how this message resonates in today's times. I'm taking a class right now that's looking at Greek tragedies and looking at how those apply to modern day lives. So trying to find ways that we can learn traditional things, yes, but how can we apply that to today?
So, Erin, another thing that we were talking about was just this bigger idea of health, right? Like, not just, okay, you go to the doctor or whatever, you get your checkups, all that kind of thing. But thinking about that on a global scale and expanding what we mean by health, I think also to wellness, right? I mean, how do you embody that?
I walk every single day, every morning in my neighborhood. There's a really nice body of water that I walk around every single day being outside in that space is really, really important, and being out in the physical environment is really important to me. And then understanding consumption, right? So I try to read a lot of books about, where do our generic drugs come from? Where are they manufactured? How healthy is that, right? So I do a lot of work around making sure that I'm conscious of the food that I eat. So I thankfully got off the wait list for a community garden plot in Boston, which is blood money sometimes, but I finally got off of that, and I look forward to eating that fresh produce and sharing it with my neighbors, but also learning what's happening across the globe, and understanding the whole global value chain, because what happens here and there affects us all.
And that's, it's so hard, right, in so many ways to stay well. Like we were talking earlier about the pandemic and loneliness, and there's all this noise, right, and politics. Adalia, from your perspective and the folks that you work with, how do you find that people are being able to not only remain well, but remain civil with each other as we try to work towards some of these goals?
I think that something that resonates with me and my peers is the understanding that we all have work to do to be able to make the bridge. There's things that I don't know that you all know and that you have to teach me. So constantly being humble and having that humility that we have things to teach one another keeps us pretty grounded.
Joel, is there something we can learn from that when we think about the American political landscape?
Absolutely. I think, number one, also assuming best intentions, that although you might disagree with me, although I might feel that firmly to the other side of you, assuming that someone is also trying to achieve the same goal as you. I think increasingly we're seeing large amounts of polarization. So finding ways that we can meet in the middle and understand that we each have the same goal of improving humanity, improving our current condition. So let's work together to try to find those solutions.
Hey, well, we'll see how that comes into the 2024 presidential election. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, we are out of time, and we will have to end it there. We could talk about so many other things, but we got places to be. That was a wonderful discussion. I want to say thank you to each of our guests for joining us. I am Paris Alston, and I hope you have a great night.